Those are clouds, Daddy. Those are chemtrails.
Chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
I look up to the sky. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? I don't wanna see you cry. I just wanna see you smile. Baby, I look up to the sky. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? I don't wanna see you die. I just wanna see you smile. Baby, we look up in the sky and we can see clear. Blue skies are gold and white. Lines appear. Them say it's natural. Me not believe them. Them say it's vital. Me not listen to them. Something strange is going on. Feel it in my heart, sensing something strong. Gotta save the future, put the rumors to rest. Gotta help the children and give it the best can. Stand around and be blind to the fast can. Taking no more, how can they relax? I look up to the sky. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? I don't wanna see you cry. I just wanna see you smile. Baby, I look up to the sky. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? I don't wanna see you die. I just wanna see you smile. Baby, living on earth, we must respect the earth. Human and animal, we all deserve the right to peace and opportunity. But nowadays we are blind, we can't see.
Well, I don't know if anyone can hear me. Okay. We're not sure if we're on the air or not. Russ is not there. This is Richard Sachs. Heard that the music happened, and we didn't hear it on this end. I don't know if anyone else can hear me or not. Maybe, let's see, we don't have access to the chat room here either. See if we can contact Dane.
Hello?
Dane, are you there?
I hear you.
Yeah, apparently we may be on the air. I really can't tell, and I don't have access to the chat room here. I hope that Russ gets back on, but why don't you try giving an introduction, because apparently we may just have gotten connected, so I think people might be able to hear you now.
Okay, we'll give it a go. Anyway, I don't know if we're on the air or not. For anybody listening, having some tech issues again today. Sorry about that. We'll try to get that ironed out for the future. This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio. This is for the week of Saturday, the 14th of June. I have a number of issues to go over today, and I am not being a great host, and that I have not passed on some of these talking subjects to my co-hosts, only one of which we have here today, Richard Sachs. But some of these issues come up fast, and one tries to make decisions as things unfold or unravel, as the case may be. So, as we have this week, another several record high stock market readings. This keeps the sheeple calm while all hell is breaking loose around the globe. At the same time, we have the O.J. Simpson story resurrected, even full panel discussions of that on Fox News, again while all hell is breaking loose around the globe. Some weeks back, we had JonBenet Ramsey story resurrected. Anything to keep the people busy and sidetracked. Gay marriage, another huge topic of conversation, as if that matters in the global context. Why can't we let people be whoever they are? Baltic Dry Index plunging. Now, many don't know what the Baltic Dry Index is. This is the index of all global shipping from anywhere to anywhere. So how the hell could the stock market be going through the roof when global shipping is going straight into the toilet? And again, this shows the degree to which we have smoke and mirrors going on right now around the globe. It's all an illusion, a giant illusion that's about to collapse. So as we press on into this ever-darkening horizon, it's hard to decide who's telling the truth and who's not. And I've tried not to draw lines in the sand with a lot of people, or certain people, I should say, in the alternative news community. But there's an article out in the last couple of days that I can't sit the fence on anymore. I can't. That article is from Mike Adams. And he writes a whole article about the fuel that's being used in the sky being the cause of the trails we see. And I don't know why so much disinformation is coming out of that camp, but I've tried to just write it off to not being clear on certain data points or not doing any research, or I don't know what it is. But when activists are legitimately trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and when someone's been in the battle as long as Mike Adams has, and I've avoided drawing this line in the sand for a long time, but I can't anymore. I can't avoid it. I did the same thing with Ed Griffin. When Ed Griffin started to put out complete disinformation about the aerosol operations, you can only call it disinformation. Ed Griffin put out that we're not really seeing grid patterns in the sky. What we're seeing is the wind just blowing these trails into certain grid pattern shapes. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. Griffin also said that the planes we think are spraying aren't really spraying. It's just invisible planes are actually spraying, and then other aircraft pass through those particulates and leave what we think are trails, but the trails are really just from the other aircraft passing through the trails of the invisible aircraft. It's so convoluted and ludicrous, it was beyond belief. So I had to go to the mat with Ed Griffin, something I don't have time to do, something I don't want to do, creating infighting or responding to certain things just within one's own supposed community that's supposedly fighting the climate engineering is astounding. So, I heard from a lot of Ed Griffin's people about my refuting of his. Anybody could have refuted Ed. It didn't have to be me. But anybody who thinks the wind is just blowing these grid patterns into these particular shapes, I mean, they need to recheck the reality. So now I'm back to Mike Adams again, and I didn't want to open this can of worms. I really didn't, but I can't avoid it anymore. When he writes a whole article that basically attributes everything we see in the sky as spray to just fuel. It's just dirty fuel. That's all it is. Not a single mention of geoengineering in the whole article. He has another article, and by the way, a comment, one of the comments of many in Mike's article was this, and I'll read the headline to his article. Irrefutable proof we are all being sprayed with toxic lead, chemtrailed into America's skies every year. Now, you'd think that would talk about climate engineering or some sort of intentional spraying, wouldn't you? No, it doesn't. Not a single mention of any sort of deliberate spraying. It's just the dirty fuel. So now it's almost like a total diversion of the subject at hand, that now it's simply a dirty fuel that's causing this, and a whole article with no mention of climate engineering, geoengineering, none of that. And here's a comment, because this is the impression the article gives, and so it feeds the people who are trying to marginalize the geoengineering issue. Here's a comment from this article. This seems like actual statistics referring to what Mike Adams has put out, and reality, versus what the, quote, tinfoil hat brigade is claiming is being sprayed on people by commercial aircraft, which is simply not happening. So there you go. That's the sort of disinformation we have there. I'm going to move on because I've had enough. I've absolutely had enough. Now, this is another excerpt from the article. Is there a covert heavy metal war being waged against Americans by China? After all, poisoning the population with heavy metals is a very effective way to collapse a nation by destroying the sanity and health of its people. Wow, doesn't that sound like exactly what the U.S. military-industrial complex would want us to believe? Coming right from Mike Adams' article, it's not our government spraying us, it's China. Or, perhaps in other articles it's Russia. But it wouldn't be our government, would it? I mean, this sounds like exactly the kind of thing that a military-industrial complex would want us to put out. So, as we press on, I want to go into other aspects that I've tried to ignore, but I can't anymore. These are also articles from Natural News. Global warming collapse. Arctic ice sheets rapidly expand as planet plunges into global cooling. Wow, that's an astounding article, isn't it? Here's where it's actually helping to sell geoengineering. That kind of title is exactly what the climate engineers in the military-industrial complex would want the alternative news community put out. That gives the impression climate engineering is working, covertly giving that impression, and we are, in fact, look at that headline, planet plunges into global cooling. Where does that come from? We've had, and I'm not an Al Gore fan, I've stated it over and over, Al Gore's, he's a complete hypocritical idiot, but reality is reality, and when we totally discredit the anti-climate engineering movement by trying to stand on completely false data, putting out false data like this, discredits our movement for the climate science community, which we need to unite with, not to alienate with false data. So how do we get planet plunges into global cooling when 9 of the last 10 years, warmest years on record, have happened, even with falsification of data to the downside, since 2000? How do we get planet plunges into global cooling when 350 consecutive months, the last 350, above normal global temperatures? How do we get planet plunges into global cooling when we just passed the 38th consecutive year in a row of above normal global temperatures? It's astounding to me. Where does this stuff come from? I mean, is there a carbon fuel industry link here that's funding some of this? I have no idea. But I mean, I can't sit quietly on it any longer. So now we have another headline from Natural News. CO2 myth busted, why we need more carbon dioxide to grow food and forests. Well, is carbon dioxide a stimulant for these plants? Yeah, it is. Can't argue that one. But what's it do to the rest of the planet? What's it do to the overall climate system? Water's good for plants too, but if you submerge them in, say, 10 feet of water, they're not going to do too well. So just because something's good doesn't mean excess is good. And there's also consequences. Also lots of consequences for this. So, I mean, this is a snapshot that you could picture a fossil fuel industry lobbyist saying. Why environmentalists are celebrating rising CO2 levels. Now, I'm not too fond of environmentalists lately because they ignore the climate engineering issue, but I don't see many of them that are celebrating the escalating CO2 levels, so I'm not sure where that came from. Here's the bottom line. Again, everybody has to research what they decide is real or not. And because what they consider to be an alternative news source that may put out reasonable information on one thing doesn't mean it's reasonable on another. All of us have to learn to sift the baby from the bathwater, period. Anybody who touts that the planet is plunging into an ice age right now I don't know what reality they're in, but it's not this one. So again, I don't know who's pulling who's changed. We have one more article that just came from the Natural News site that the planet is full of aluminum. That aluminum is, in fact, again, falling from the skies, and it's contaminating our foods. Whole huge article, not a word, not a single word about geoengineering spraying of these metals. Where does that come from? I don't know. I really don't know. But I hope they get their act together over there if they're really here for the common good and for the truth, because although they put out good data on a lot of things, I have real issue with it now, and I've bit my lip as long as I'm going to bite it. More disinformation. We've heard HARP's going to be bulldozed. They're going to close HARP, blah, blah, blah. Headlines today, HARP granted last-minute reprieve as Air Force considers handoff. What a surprise. It continues. The agency said it may put off dismantling the site for up to 10 months to allow a transfer to another agency, an option that has been promoted by scientists from the University of Alaska and around the world. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all smoke and mirrors. The planet's descending into total meltdown, and let me elaborate a little bit with that. A headline publication out of the Arctic News site, a very well-researched paper, and again, sift the baby from the bathwater. The data coming from the Arctic News website, definitely accurate data, corresponds with other sources of data from the ground, but we have a lot of the AMIC scientists pushing for the implementation of geoengineering as if it hasn't been going on for decades already. So again, we have to sift the baby from the bathwater. The data on what's happening on the ground is accurate. Their call for climate engineering to be implemented is beyond insane. And how can they be that blind? I don't think they are. In fact, I'm fairly sure, I know one of the scientists from that group, and I'm fairly sure he's been threatened that he has to toe this line. So here's what we have as several statements from this publication from the Arctic News site this week, new study. There are such massive methane reserves below the Arctic Ocean floor that they represent around 100 times the amount that is required to cause a Permian-style major extinction event. 100 times more, and I think that estimate's conservative. Permian extinction, by the way, was about a 95% global extinction event. Second quote from that article, if only a few percent of the subsea methane hydrate reserves in the Arctic Ocean, which is, by the way, some 100 billion tons of carbon, even if a few percent is dislocated, the methane is released into the upper atmosphere, it will cause total deglaciation and massive extinction. Another quote from further into the study. The whole northern hemisphere is now covered by a thickening atmospheric methane veil that is spreading southwards at about 1 kilometer a day. It already totally envelops the United States. Yet one more quote from further in the study, and this is important. The giant pollution cloud over the United States and Canada has speeded up the Gulf Stream by 3 times since the 1940s. The Gulf Stream carries huge quantities of heat in the Arctic Ocean, where it is destabilizing methane hydrate, releasing vast amounts of methane into the Arctic atmosphere. Now, let's go back to the beginning of that, the giant pollution cloud over the United States and Canada. What are we talking about there? Yes, there's a lot of anthropogenic pollution, but what's the greatest source mathematically by far? Geoengineering. That's the intent of geoengineering, to fill the atmosphere with light-scattering pollution. That's what it is, toxic metal pollution. So here we have them really admitting to the elephant in the room, but not admitting to what it actually is. So we know we have more than enough data, and I've held to this the entire time I've been in this fight for over a decade, that the climate engineering canon does create large regional cooling events at the cost of a worsened overall warming. So as it has done this, altering wind currents, which alter ocean currents, now we have warm water pumping into the Arctic, releasing Pandora from her box, if you will. The methane is, if it continues, will seal all our fate. There's no question about that. Geoengineering has to stop, period. One more sentence from this study, one more phrase. We have got just over 14 years of progressively, this is mathematically based on the data that we have available, of progressively worsening weather with extreme storms before we face the possibility of an Arctic methane-induced 8 degrees C atmospheric temperature rise with associated global deglaciation and mass extinction. Now, it doesn't mean we stay at the current temperature for 14 years, and then suddenly we go up. 8 degrees C is about 16 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't just leap up to that point. We're progressively on our way there right now. And no indication of any way to stop this. The only thing we can do to really help the situation is stop climate engineering. It's helped to bring us to this point. So, again, the planet's in total meltdown, period. Any notion that it's not is a false notion. People have to get away from their biases. They have to. The more we stand on solid ground, the more likely we are to unite with the climate science community and not to alienate them. So, and they've been very, very short of any honor so far. We see that. But if they can't refute our data, if we acknowledge what's really happening on the ground, that's a big leap into trying to unite these tribes and not standing on completely false data. That's exactly what the fossil fuel industry would say. So, Richard, I know it's just you and me. I know that my drawing the line in the sand with Mike Adams is not something you want to see me do. I can't help it. And I'm curious. I can't help it any longer. I can't bite my lip on it any longer. And I'm curious what you think about him putting out an article that indicates what we see in the sky is just from dirty fuel.
Yeah, well, you brought up so many great points, Dane. There's a lot I have to say about it, and we can go back and forth. But primarily, I just really appreciate and love your honesty and the fact that you're clearly motivated to see everyone, survive and have a good quality life as much as possible, which is exactly where I'm coming from. I don't have any.
Your integrity. I know why you're in this, and I feel the same toward you. So, but don't feel that. I know you have your feelings on certain things. I'm not trying to.
Well, I'm going to tell you that. But I just wanted to say that first, and I don't have any other motives.
I know that.
Except, if I have one other motive, it might be just to keep learning as much as I can, and to always be open to correcting any mistakes I might make. But that's really where I'm coming from now. As far as the issue with Mike, I'm certainly not ready to consider Mike as a bad person or motivated badly, only because, A, that's not the primary focus that we have, and B, the interaction that I've had with him has shown to me in other issues that he's extremely motivated to the welfare of humanity and has severely gone after government agencies and other sources of different disinformation very effectively. So I'm not ready to discount that, but it's interesting that you bring up this article that everybody who's on his mailing list will see. I got it, but the interesting part is he actually sent this to me beforehand, saying, "What do you think about this article?" So I saw it a day before the rest of the world, and I'm in the middle of a conversation with him, actually, waiting for some responses, where I asked him, after reading that article, what about the actual spray programs that are being done intentionally by government agencies and corporations working together, which are actually all the same thing at this point, which are intentionally dumping poison on us, in my opinion, very specifically to cause massive worldwide destruction, not by some kind of oversight that the science is wrong or anything like that. They're not that dumb, and I have gotten only silence so far. So I, am quick to defend people in situations where there's doubt, but I need to get a good answer on this one issue, and I'm not going to, lie for the protection of anybody that I can think of right now.
No, I know you wouldn't. I would you would.
And so I think what's being promoted in that article is misleading, at least, because what it says to me is, okay, finally there's some reality to this chemtrail thing, and that's a terrible message as far as I'm concerned, because the reality is that we're under air raids, basically. I know we have to call it engineering to talk to the people that think that this language is important, and they're really proud of their academic vocabulary, all that, but to me it's like if somebody hits you in the face, calling them a facial rearrangement engineer. I don't attribute them that much respect because of what they're doing. And if we have to talk, that, to me, science language in that sense is like baby talk to people who are not ready to say their actual truth. And I think that the points made by Mike in that article look like they're designed to distract people from what's really going on. So I completely, follow what you're saying there.
I heard from a lot of people this morning that were very, very upset and felt, the same sort of impression. And I bit my lip even after the aluminum in the food article came out. Not a single mention of climate engineering in that either as a source. And
I also asked Mike about that when it happened, and the response was it was like overlooked, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't see how something that huge could be overlooked.
Well, it's again, that's how I feel. And in regard to me putting my sights on somebody else, Amy Goodman with Democracy Now! A lot of people know who she is.
Yeah,
I've met her twice. Was not impressed. I mean, she seemed like a very self-centered, bitter person. I supported her out of my pocket for several years, or her show, I should say. Aired it locally. I spent about $10,000 on that I couldn't really afford to spend.
Yeah.
And when I began to, after I met her especially, began to see that she was not covering certain issues that I was trying to bring to her attention, climate engineering and 9/11, and then I find out from people who work with Amy that I know that she's gotten a grant from the Ford Foundation, and she is literally told what she can say and what she can't.
Right. I want to make another quick comment right in the middle of that, Dane, and that is that I'm immediately put on alert by anybody who's trying to push democracy. I consider it one of the most damaging ideas on the planet right now, and we should be a little bit more intelligent when we hear tyrannical rulers like the Bushes and Obama and most of the presidents for the last 100 years who are all corrupt, pushing democracy like they care about humanity. It's a tool of manipulation leading to tyranny, and that's all it is.
I fully agree with you on that. In fact, it's just like the quote, the geoengineering term, that it puts a certain light on something that it doesn't deserve, and the democracy term is so intertwined with the power structure and the global insanity that I agree with you there, and that's a good point about the very title of her show. But I
mean, you just could get an announcement one day that, 51% want all of X group rounded up and put in camps, and it's democratic because we did it by voting, and no mention of the Constitution whatsoever.
I agree. And her mentality, again, I'm told, is that she feels, at least she's putting out some news. That doesn't get it. A half-truth doesn't get it. A half-truth is not the whole truth. And so whatever a person's mentality, whether it's Amy Goodman or Mike Adams, whoever's paying whose bills, whoever's pulling whose chains, I can't say. In Amy Goodman's case, I can say a bit. But the bottom line is a half-truth can do more damage than no truth at all. So everybody out there, and this is ultimately it comes down to everybody listening, everybody that's in the fight for the common good. We all have to learn enough to recognize a half-truth from a whole truth. And we have to.
I mean, language is really a more powerful weapon than nuclear bombs at this point. You can control a whole planet without having to spend money on one single bomb if you have a sophisticated psychological campaign that you can implement.
Well, it certainly worked well so far. And I had to make a trip into town yesterday, and seeing in certain places, which I'm forced to frequent to get basic supplies because of this structure of our society. But in a Costco, for example, yesterday, and you see the completely disconnected mentality of, it's like being for me it feels like a zombie movie, that you're looking at these people just scurrying around, gathering up all sorts of things they don't need, that are just from all sorts of recreational things to various other types of supplies that are just simply stripping the planet of its resources, and no apparent clue. I mean, and I talk to some of these people. I mean, if there's certain opportunities or certain vendors there, and I can't resist any opportunity to try to ask them if they've seen the way the skies look, and I'll pass on a flyer or two, and just to get a barometer of people. And so many are unwilling to even crack their eyelids as to what's going on above their heads. And even if you got a parking lot, or from the parking lot outside the store, if you got a sky full of spray, and they don't care. They don't look up. The trees, in fact, in these all around Northern California, Redding, I mean, they couldn't look much worse unless they were all stone dead, but they're half dead everywhere. Dead branches sticking out, leaves falling off, bark burn off the trees. Incredibly intense UV and heat. People just moseying around as if they're filling up their boats. We have what's left of a lake here. It's almost empty now, Lake Shasta, but they still want to go boating and drag their $500 inflatables around and fill up the ice chest with beer and Coke and to hell with any sense of personal responsibility. But that's what we have. We have a society that's been conditioned just like that, as you mentioned. So it's interesting to see it, even at this late hour, even with things imploding the way they are, even with the water virtually drying up over California, the air's drying up, the sprayed particulates are desiccants, they absorb and accrete all available moisture. It's all hell's breaking loose. And if we can't even get good information out of the alternative sites, back to the point I was originally trying to make, everybody has to learn enough to sift the baby from the bathwater. We all need to be able to do that. We all have to be leaders, in a sense. We all need to be, and not have to look somewhere else for every verification of what we think should be a certain way or whatever conclusions we come to. We need to all learn enough to be able to stand on our own feet and help lead the charge wherever we're at, right?
Yeah. I also want to make a comment about science in general, and that I have great not only respect but actual enjoyment of real science whenever I can find it. I just find that it's almost non-existent and extinct these days, and I don't have any respect whatsoever for what passes for most of modern science, which is defined as paraphrasing or repeating or rearranging what you've been taught is acceptable to think or what you've been paid to repeat. And I don't think that deserves the term of science any more than poisoning humanity deserves the term engineering, unless we're having to pretend for the sake of communication with these people. And in general, science to me is incredibly exciting, and it means investigating, trying to find out what's going on in your environment and in yourself and everything going on around you. And as far as the CO2 issue is concerned, and your comment that some people were saying CO2 is good for plants, which, of course, they do use CO2 all the time. It's what they breathe. But
it is. I acknowledge that. It is.
But starting in the early 60s, I was really interested in this topic and doing a lot of research with it, in touch with people like John Hamaker and Don Weaver, who were concerned in 1965 that the CO2 levels would lead to the extinction of life on Earth. They didn't believe it was through through heat. They thought it would be through cold, but those issues are minor details. Whether we die by freezing or heating, to me, makes absolutely zero difference. What makes a difference is whether we disrupt the natural systems that are the only way of real survival and stability. And as far as CO2 of being used by plants is concerned, a lot of times what's left out of that discussion is the limiting factor of what allows plants to use more CO2, and that is primarily soil mineral levels. And just briefly, what happens at the end of an interglacial period like where we are now, about 10 or 12,000 years into the latest nice weather period, geologically speaking, is that the soil mineral levels in dust form go down to the degree that plants are struggling to find enough minerals to sustain themselves. And if they get more CO2, they can't just grow more and absorb it because they're low on minerals. And so there is a way to get them to absorb more CO2 that could be integrated into a healing approach to this whole, if all forms of so-called geoengineering were stopped, and that is soil mineralization with rock dust. And that really could be done, probably a lot cheaper than the current cost of so-called geoengineering. But that's the main reason, as far as I can see, that more CO2 is not helpful. And as long as those mineral levels are low, the CO2 just hangs up in the atmosphere, creating a higher and higher density of blanket that doesn't allow the normal transfer of heat. So I think that's what's going on with that.
Your points are completely on target, completely valid, and it's that's parallel with what I was trying to state earlier, that you have to look at the bigger picture. Although certain elements are, of course, essential to life, it doesn't mean that too much is not harmful. It's like iron, for example, in the human body. Not enough iron, big problems. Too much iron, huge problems. There has to be a balance. And when we see that being ignored and this sort of cherry-picking of information to make a point that we can see certain industries would want to make that point. We've certainly seen that with the fossil fuel industry and what they've done and the kind of points they try to make that are completely out of context and completely false in the overall picture. People need to recognize that. That's all. And if we look at previous eras, in fact, the two things I wanted to mention, I know the discussion of global cooling in the past, for example, the 70s, a lot of people bring this up. In the early 70s, there was discussion that was the planet perhaps cooling, and there was a lot of headlines that have been resurrected now as sort of a way to muddy the water. The climate engineering started in the late 40s, and there was a very anomalous 2-decade downturn in the temperatures that the climate engineering was initially more effective because it hadn't really completely shredded the ozone layer yet. That shading, the negative consequences don't kick in for a while, so it has an initial effect. So if you look at the graph and compare that with the early ramp-up of the climate engineering programs, it was effective early on. Toxic still, yes, because we saw autism rates and so forth already starting to rise as soon as these programs were implemented. We saw, even as acknowledged by Stanford University, an Arctic haze over the poles that they couldn't explain, metallic particles, couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So all these dots connect. But then as the negative aspects start to really kick in, what do the climate engineers do? Do they back off? No. They increase the spraying. More. When the planet really starts to warm, 98, which is the warmest we recorded to that point in time, they could see that what they were doing wasn't working, so what do? Do they stop? No. They do even more. That's what the military-industrial complex does. So it's just important to look at the bigger picture to realize what came about, when, why. For example, the global or the climate change term in 98, 99, that's when that term was implemented, when they really unleashed climate engineering and knew they would be causing these massive fluctuations in temperature, so they have to implement the right term so it seems normal to people to go from 100 degrees to snow in one day. So much smoke and mirrors. I know it's hard to see through, but people need to learn to discern for themselves and try to sort through what's being thrown at them, examine motives. And right now, Richard, as you've so correctly said many times, we face an all-out battle for our existence if we can't breathe without sucking this in. I hold to that point myself, and it's poisoning everything, and the effects are already cataclysmic, getting worse by the day. We have to focus on certain priorities, and that's something else, again, why I brought up all the other issues with certain groups that are fighting about gay rights, transgender bathrooms, or, gosh, I mean, there's a long list of things people are fighting about right now, or fighting for. You got environmental groups fighting to save a butterfly here, a fish there. We better focus on plugging the leak in the ship, or nothing else will matter.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dana. And like you've said many times, we have very, very limited time, if any at all. And that's if we're not past too many points of no return. I don't know. But whether we are or not, the time is very valuable. And I think that, as you correctly pointed out, whether it's getting warmer or colder doesn't matter to the people who are spraying. They're going to spray anyway. And I think that proves they're not spraying because they're trying to do us any good. They're spraying for a lot of reasons, and they wouldn't be putting all these complex, damaging biological formulas in there if it were just to try to make the weather, turn out real well for us. I think that what matters here, if we want to get right to the core issue, is the people that we've got in control and what their motives are and what their agendas are that they're working to complete. And if we don't change that, then we can have scientific discussions until we're all extinct, and it won't make any difference.
It won't, and certainly there's no arguing that everything that these powers, these global powers, are doing is not for the common good. It's not these programs are not benevolent in any way, shape, or form. What I brought up many times about the corrects it used in the Gulf of Mexico exemplifies that. They didn't give a damn about making the situation better or less toxic. They simply cared about hiding it as long as they could.
Right, and you know what's interesting about the Corexit is they even sprayed it on the land. And it's not that the airplanes got confused and they didn't remember what water looked like. They sprayed it right over the people. And I think that we have to be open to just using common sense and realize what that means.
Yeah, it shows a bigger agenda. It shows a much bigger agenda, and I don't think anybody can really rationally argue that at this point.
And then they had Obama go down there and say all the seafood was safe and you should go swimming in the Gulf.
Yeah, well, he was swimming in some, I think there was a photo op done there, wasn't there, where he wasn't actually in the Gulf?
Yeah, he was at a different place, you know, suitable for a good...
They made it look like he was splashing around the Gulf, but it was behind some sort of barrier, you know, to keep the toxic elements out. We see also a couple other points of interest. We've now had the second, it was a Category 5 cyclone off southern Mexico in the eastern Pacific. And it's interesting how, if you really look, it's clear how they're trying to downplay the magnitude of what's happening. For example, this last cyclone was at 55 miles an hour. Now that's still a Category 4. 156 is a Category 5. Isn't it astounding that we've had a couple of hurricanes now that they're both, it's the strongest two hurricanes this time of year ever recorded, but they would just happen to level out at 1 mile an hour short of becoming an even bigger record. That they
Amazing coincidence, yeah.
155. We see all sorts of temperatures. We see a lot of 99-degree temperatures around. That's pretty interesting to me, too. It just sort of ceilings out before it gets to triple digits, because that doesn't look quite as bad as 100. We see them falsifying the temperatures here routinely in Northern California, 4 or 5 degrees under-reporting of the temperatures. So the point I'm trying to get across, it's a lot hotter than people realize. Food costs now, according to some of the local markets here in Northern California, said publicly they think a 30% rise by the end of the year. Can't keep that up. People can't afford it. People are living off their credit cards right now. They're using their house for an ATM machine, again, because that's what allows the system to keep working. As you print money, prime the system, goes into the markets. They have to keep the markets up because otherwise nobody would have a retirement account anymore. It's all imploded, and the grand facade ends. So it's amazing how many people can't see this because they don't want to see it. They don't want to see the fact that the stock market, I looked at some of the valuations this morning. I mean, if you look at nuts and bolts, it's overvalued by 60-70% or more. And all the news is bad. How the hell can the market go up? Because it's just simply artificially primed, period.
It's completely manipulated.
Well, you have companies right now. This is how it works, and most people have no clue. What the fiat money, of course, they print whatever they want. But now you have zero interest. Even some push toward negative interest are actually paying people to borrow money. So you have these massive companies that their profit margins are completely in the toilet. They borrow at zero interest. This is actually happening. So for anybody who is considering this is not speculation. These massive companies borrow money for no interest, zero. They buy their own stocks in their own companies, which makes it look like the company's profitable because they're able to borrow money with no interest. That gives these big executives bonuses, makes the bottom line look good. It's all debt-based. It's all debt-based. It's literally a giant balloon, the whole thing. There's nothing inside it. You can't keep this going much longer. We talked in previous shows about the massive car lots all over the globe with, I think, 2 or 3 million brand new unsold cars sitting and rotting so that the snake can keep eating its own tail, keep the wheels turning. It's an astounding situation, and even now at this late date, so many people going on about their normal pursuits of pleasure, trying to pretend, it's like sort of the whistling in the dark through the graveyard scenario.
Well, I think it's clear that most people are not capable right now of actual seeing what's happening, and it's for many reasons, partly the psychological programming, the looking around and seeing everybody else being just as unconscious as they are, the public school system, the fake science system, but also coming from a health perspective, I would say it's the chemical assault from fluoride, which has really obvious dumbing down effects, and all the other chemicals in the food. And it turns out, for example, with the GMOs now that they're not the only place where you eat Roundup. It's being used as a ripening agent. The glyphosate, Roundup, is being sprayed on almost all kinds of foods now that have nothing to do with GMOs. So if your food's not entirely organic, you're basically eating Roundup. And all these things together have combined effects on the brain and the consciousness. And I think we have to realize we're going to have a small percentage of people that still retain some degree of awareness. And strategically, if we want to solve this and not just talk about it, then we have to realize we have a small group that we can reach relative to the whole population, and what is the most effective thing that those people can do to actually change this stuff that's coming from the top. So we need to look at that, I think.
I agree. And in looking at that, everybody has to, in order to have the stamina to keep pressing on in this battle, it comes down to a philosophy. And if your philosophy is you have to have some sort of guarantee of success, of some certain particular ending where everything goes back magically to what it was before, and that's your motivation for fighting, you're not going to last long. Simply not going to last long in this battle. You have to want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, period. That's your motive. If there's a purpose in life, what could be a greater or more inarguable purpose? To want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, period. Not because you're guaranteed a certain ending, but because for the common good, you're willing to engage in fighting for truth, justice, so forth. So I hope everybody, this is a time when everybody is certainly examining their philosophies. I hear from a lot of people who get very discouraged, and I understand that. Gosh, I understand that. I mean, I've been in the trench for so long in this particular battle that, you know, and so many times you're not only getting machine gunned from outside the trench, you find out somebody's knifing you in the back from the inside the trench, you know, that you thought was an ally, and all this stuff can be disheartening, but if ultimately your goal is to exercise your will correctly, and that belongs to you, and no one can take it away. That's important for everybody to realize, too. No one can take your will. Can't do it. They can put a gun in your head. They cannot take your will. It belongs to each of us independently. It's ours to protect. Our honor, our virtue is ours to protect. So no matter what, if that's the point, if that's the purpose, then, and we march on with that purpose, then we can't lose. We can't fail. We absolutely can't fail. And whatever happens, it has to matter. And it doesn't, for every person, Richard, who any of us, any of the activists out there that are all trying to reach other people, for each person that they wake up, that any of us helps to wake up, doesn't that matter in and of itself? Isn't that important in and of itself?
Yeah, I think that, you know, our life here on this level is not permanent, and that we're not going to stay here regardless. That's not what we're fighting for, you know, and when we leave, we're going to have the impressions of everything that we did here. I like the quote by Maximus in Gladiator when he says, "What we do in life echoes in eternity." I thought that was beautiful. And I also want to comment about what you just said about our will. Well, that's kind of true, but the other thing is if you get injected with the right drugs, they can really change your behavior. They can change your perception. They can change what you think is going on. They can change your sense of fear or confidence. And so those are being used to maximum effect right now. And I would suggest if anybody really cares about holding on to your will and your sense of self-direction, get off drugs. And I mean that in the widest sense of the word. You know, first of all, throw out the ridiculous drugs of tobacco and alcohol and all the legal ways of suicide, but also get off medical drugs as fast as you can when you can find out alternatives that don't hurt your body, and there are many, because I know about that from decades of experience in that field, and the mental drugs of television. All these drugs definitely affects your ability to exercise your own will. It's not yours anymore if you don't even know who you are. So, you know, I've just watched that as an example with fluoride recently, that as it gets into people and as it combines with statin drugs and all these other poisons that are specifically given so that you won't have your will, you know, find ways to get clean, because you'll just be amazed at how different you see reality if you can manage to learn about how to do that and then do it.
You know, Richard, that's an extremely good point, and there's no denying that. I mean, that yes, our will belongs to us, but if something is clouding or clogging our thinking, it can be no longer our will in that sense, no longer our choice. And I've never been high in my life, ever, from any sort of drug. And I'm grateful for that. I had a father that was an alcoholic, and I saw what it did to him, and he was a very strong and powerful man, 6'7". Not much he couldn't deal with if it was sober, but when he wasn't, I remember as a boy being shocked at this liquid in a bottle that could turn this giant of a man into something else, and it made such a deep and profound impression on me that I think it kept me away from everything. I didn't want anything to ever affect me in that manner. I didn't want to lose whatever strength that I might have, and so those points are very well taken. And I know many people in my life that have engaged heavily in substances that and still do. And I believe what you said applies. I believe it's accurate, and I think if we make an effort, whatever people have done in the past, if they just try to clean their systems up now and get all the neurons firing again, I think that's imperative. We need everybody in the game to be as focused as possible. So anyway, those points are well taken.
Something on what you say about being high. I think it's, in a way, it's what everybody wants. They're just different ideas of how to get there. And there are chemicals in your own body, endorphins and other things like that are actually healthy and good for you, that create a sustained high energy and high, exhilarated consciousness. And I can say after a long, long time of working on how to make those constant, that you can live in an almost constant, natural, high state of strong energy, clarity, and exhilaration if you learn how to detoxify mentally and physically, and then put in the right nutrition and other things, connection to the sunlight and the earth, and everything that you're warned against is mostly good for you. And if you learn about how to make that transition and consider the drugs that you were using as friends to be actually rapists that you don't need in your life at all, that are out to hurt you, make that change, and you can stay high all the time and feel strong no matter what's around you. And I can tell you that from experience.
And I understand those feelings and felt that a lot when I was, in previous years, able to march out into the wilderness and climb to the top of a mountain and look around and try to take it all in. It's I have to admit it's becoming much more difficult for me now, and that the forest is dying. It's silent. It's just gnarled up and very different than it was. And what I've had to do now, instead of sitting in angst at that, though, instead of just sitting the bench somewhere, I have to stay in this fight. And while there's still a single tree out there standing, and as I've said before, a single bird chirping, a single frog croaking, I have to try to do everything I can to preserve that. And there's meaning and value in that. If we spend our mental energy wishing for a reality that is not, then we become ineffective for what we might do to be able to affect or to be able to change the reality that was not meant to be. So, again, I hope everybody examines their philosophy and decides to embrace whatever challenges we've been given. And we don't know the future. None of us know the future. In fact, if we could stop climate engineering, we don't know at this point how things would unfold. There would certainly be violent weather as the planet responds to all the horrific damage that's been done to it, as it tries to cool itself, as it tries to increase the hydrological cycle. That's part of what the planet does to compensate this kind of damage. But that being said, what a giant leap forward that would be. What a giant leap forward. And as you say, we have to expose those behind us, because they're behind everything else as well. But what a giant leap that would be in that direction as well. And so anytime there's somebody saying something that's not okay, and we just had some big posts on the disinformation directory this week, Richard, a big radio announcer he was a newspaper editor that clearly didn't do any research at all on the climate engineering issue and proceeded to toe the power structure line of trying to marginalize it. And we exposed them, and some very good people on the disinformation directory. Again, we have a couple new people there helping us now. We have Doug Diamond still. We have Corey Gunnels. Russ is helping, and we have a couple new additions too. That I don't know if they want me to name them or not. So I'll wait before I do. But we're trying to expose those people that are so willingly helping to hide the crime of climate engineering, the greatest single crime in human history. That could only be eclipsed by nuclear catastrophe, which may be coming now as well. But so we're trying on both fronts to expose those who think they can, with impunity, put out disinformation, towing the party line, giving these blanket statements of tinfoil hat sort of conspiracy theory, all the usual terms that people are so programmed to use, but no longer with impunity. And we're posting these people also, not just on Disinformation Directory, but on Facebook and so forth. And the point is so that the public at large knows who these people are, and we send an email back to each individual we post, letting them know that we're putting them out to the larger public audience, so that when climate engineering is exposed, that public will then come to them and ask them to explain why they lied.
Good. I think that's great. I mean, it's too late not to use honesty as much as we can, and I mean well-meaning honesty. I'm not talking about just tearing somebody down because you like to, and there's a lot of people that do that. But I'm saying it's not about personalities. It's for the sake of the truth about what's going on, getting out to more people and not being obstructed. And I that's why I sent you the letter that I got from my so-called representative in this area. She was explaining how, my paranoia was unnecessary about the spraying because it's not really happening, and this is all just condensation trails, persistent contrails, other ridiculous terms like that. And I would also like to get in before we're done here that I really want to appeal to not only my friend Mike Adams, but everybody else in the position who can reach lots and lots of people. Please give us a hand, or tell us honestly where you are on the issue, and be very open about it, because we don't have a lot of time right now before things get so intense that this looks like they're good old days, and I unfortunately really see that happening. So we need everybody's goodwill and attempt and best use of their contact base, everything else, in order to get the reality out there, and then right away solutions that are natural and don't have any harmful side effects.
Yeah, as bad as things are today, you're right. In a few months, people might look back on this period right now and see that it was not nearly as bad as what they're experiencing, at a given point in time in the future. So I agree. The walls are unraveling quickly, and we're descending into a whole new reality. But that being said, again, back to philosophy. If people simply embrace whatever challenge they're given and don't try to hold on to an old paradigm that's no longer here. That's the definition of misery, wanting something that isn't. So embrace what we have, embrace the challenge, rise to it, make that your value in life through the correct use of your will while we still have it. Before we've all had so much metal that we can't think straight. I mean, if we can bring these programs to light before we reach that turning point with our own cognitive function, then perhaps we can, who knows what good we will still affect in this equation. So anyway, it's a day at a time. Let's hope we get Russ back again for next week. I think we're about out of time right now, Richard. I'm going to figure out the tech issue so that we don't have this issue anymore. Assuming we're on the air, I hope we are.
Yeah, I
think
so.
There we go. Yeah, we have music now. So hey, for GeoEngineering Watch Radio, this is Dane Wigington, Richard Sachs. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week and be a little more on schedule with our timing and our broadcast. Thank you.
Thanks.